The LAII promotes and supports interdisciplinary teaching, research, and meaningful public engagement to advance the production and dissemination of knowledge about Latin America and Iberia. Latin America is designated as one of 7 priority areas of research for UNM, and we proudly contribute to both the university's intellectual community as well as local and global discourse through programming. We'd first like to take a moment to recognize the traditional homelands of the Pueblo of Sandia on which UNM sits. The original peoples of New Mexico, Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache, have deep connections to the land and have made significant contributions to the broader community statewide. We honor the land itself and those who remain stewards of this land throughout the generations, and also acknowledge our committed relationship to Indigenous peoples. I'm honored and excited to introduce activist, artist, poet, and organizer, Hazel Patrice Chavez, and Assistant Professor of English at UNM, Bernadine Hernandez. Both are here today as members of fronteristxs, a collective of artists in New Mexico working with community advocates to end migrant detention and to abolish the carceral state. In this presentation, the fronteristxs collective will discuss their ongoing collaborative work in the abolition movement. They'll talk about the historical violence of the US immigration system and its relationship to racism in the criminal justice system. The fronteristxs collective is currently working with several coalitions on 1, the Free Them All campaign to demand immediate release of individuals from jails, prisons, and detention centers. 2, the campaign to divest New Mexico ERB funds from private prisons, and 3, a legislative ban on private prisons in New Mexico. The collective will shed light on the ways that those in power work to silence individuals and give insight on how you can get involved in the campaign to free them all. Today's event is part of a series on immigration and human rights co-sponsored by UNM's Maxwell Museum of Anthropology, the Alfonso Ortiz Center for Intercultural Studies, and El Centro de la Raza. We invite you to join us at the next event, which is a screening of Las Madres de Berks with filmmaker Michelle Angela Ortiz on Sunday, October 18th. So for more information about this or other upcoming events or the LAII, visit laii.unm.edu. And now please join me in welcoming Hazel Patrice Chavez and Bernadine Hernandez.
So thank you for joining us today, and as we talk about our artist collective and how we are working towards to end the carceral state here in New Mexico. So first, before I start, I just want to give a really big thank you to the Latin American Iberian Institute and Marlene and Professor Francis Hayashida, who requested the Fronteristxs collective to present our work here today as part of the Immigration, Migration, and Human Rights series. We want to thank you all for being here with us today. And so just to give a quick introduction, my name is Hazel Patrice Chavez. I use they, them pronouns. Like I am an artist, activist, poet, filmmaker. A lot of my work has revolved in and around the US southern border for some time now. I try to center the histories of my people from El Salvador and Mexico and our generational experiences when it comes to migration, assimilation, and survival. I currently have a show up right now at Sanitary Tortilla Factory called Blindfolded Under the Same Sun. Please feel free to check it out right now. And so as of right now, I'm not working with or attached to an institution, but I did just graduate from UNM with my Master's in Fine Arts in Sculpture this past spring. So I'll go ahead and let Bernadine introduce herself.
Thanks, Hazel. Thank you everyone for being here. My name is Bernadine Hernandez, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm an assistant professor of American Literary Studies in the English department, and I specialize in transnational feminism and sexual economies of the US borderlands, along with American Literary Studies and Empire in the 19th and 20th century, migration, border, and borderland theory, and Chicana Latina literature and sexualities. My forthcoming book is titled Border Bodies, Racialized Sexuality, Sexual Capital, and Violence in the 19th Century Borderlands, and it's forthcoming with UNC Press. So look out for that next year. and I'm also a public-facing scholar and a member of the Fronteristas collective. So we're going to go ahead and just start this presentation. We will explain this picture at the start of this presentation that you see right now in a little bit. So I'm going to ask Hazel to go to the next slide. So we are the Fronteristas, a collective of artists in New Mexico working with community advocates to end migrant detention and to abolish the carceral state. We believe in fight for a world of liberation for all. We do this through direct action, coalition building, and grassroots organizing. Along with Hazel, our two other co-collaborators are Suhan Ho, who is also a professor at the University of New Mexico in art, and Martin Wanam. We're organizing in New Mexico to end the carceral state, which means that we are trying to abolish private and public prisons and migrant detentions through on-the-ground art actions.
And so really as a collective, we reject the current system of racial capitalism based on resource extraction and the inhumanity of the US prison system. We believe there has never been a better time in recent history for the role of an artist in the freedom struggle. And as a collective, we work to center and uplift the artistic talents of those that are directly impacted as a way to create collective agency.
Yes. We as a collective have a really long way to go in this fight, and we're all pretty exhausted at this point with everything that's been happening this year. So as you'll see in this slide, the US has the highest rate of incarceration worldwide. This is a huge number compared to the rest of the world, and that means that nearly 1 out of every 100 people in the US is in prison or in jail. So if we look at this slide here, it states that 1 out of 5 prisoners worldwide is incarcerated in the US as compared to other countries worldwide. So for example, China has a much more dense population and they have 1.6 million people incarcerated versus the US, who has 2.3 million. What's even really more troublesome for our very own state is that New Mexico incarcerates people at a rate 18.7% higher than the national rate, as you can see in this beautiful yellow graph here.
And so one of the campaigns that the Fronteristas collective focuses on is the Divestment Campaign. So we thought we'd kind of talk a little bit about this because we are constantly urging, we want the new educator and staff funds to be divested from private prisons. And many of our own UNM faculty and employees pay into these pension funds that are invested in private prisons and geo groups which run these private prisons. And so what's even more alarming is that 43% of New Mexico relies on private prisons. And that means really that 43% of people incarcerated in New Mexico are in private prisons, compared to the nationwide percentage of 8.5%. And so in 2017, 73% of all people in migration and immigration detention centers were confined in privately run facilities. And so as you probably know, there's also severe racial disparities in prisons and jails in New Mexico. 46% of the state population is Latinx, and they make up 52% of the prison population. And so that in stark relation to the 40% of the state population only being white and 31% being in the prison population.
So because the work we do is abolitionist work, we're not solely focused on the migrant population, although that's how we began. But we wanted to give you just a little rundown and brief definitions of jails, detention centers, public and private prisons, just in case you're confused as to what is going on in there. So jails are probably the most common term you'll hear in relation to the police state, and they house 3 main types of people. So the first is people who are being held for plea agreement, trial, or sentencing. The second is misdemeanor offenses. And the third are people who are awaiting prison transfer. That is in contrast to migrant detentions. And so migrant detentions are jail, prisons, or facilities where migrants from other countries are detained by order of the court. And I think that this is the most kind of misunderstood detention and facility, is because detention centers are not, specific buildings, whatever quote unquote the criminal is. So these people haven't been convicted of anything, of a crime, and they're involved in civil proceedings, yet they're being detained in these cages and in these detention centers. And prisons then are secure facilities that house people who are convicted of a felony or a crime of more than 1 year. And so there's a difference between public and private prisons. So public prisons are operated by local, state, and federal government. And then the private prisons are confinement centers that are owned and operated by third parties and are contracted by the local, state, and federal government. So the private prisons would be like the GEO group that we're trying to get the NMERB to divest from.
And so before we kind of jump into talking about our campaigns, we thought we might give you a brief history to put us into context. And so I'll sort of go quickly through this history, and then also talk about where it is that the Fronteristas collective fits into this conversation. And so something that's really important that we always have to recognize in doing this work is that a lot of the atrocities that have been and are taking place at our southern border did not start with Trump. You know, it is coming from a long line of presidents that have always been enacting policies that are inhumane towards individuals. And for example, during the Obama administration, there was 3 million deportations that took place. And then actually an interesting fact is that before Obama left office, he had actually banned private prisons. And it was when Trump was elected, he reinstated them as ICE detention facilities. And so it was really shortly after Trump got into office that the Fronteristas collective took its first iteration as a collective in the form of an exhibition in San Diego. And so around the same time, you know, we were bearing witness to the zero tolerance policy that separated families. The Remain in Mexico policy was set into practice. There was also in February of 2019 that Trump had called a nationwide state of emergency to really try and get funding to build the southern wall. And during this time, you know, there's family separation that's going on. There's hunger strikes that are happening. There's also reports of really high cases of sexual abuse of migrant children that are being recorded. There are reports of rotten food being served and of folks not being able to shower and properly hygiene themselves. And so it was around this time that the Fronteristas had also partnered up and collaborated with the Tornillo Occupation Coalition, which was protesting the children detention centers in Tornillo, Texas. And so one of the important things to also recognize is that around this time, you know, the Trump administration had really took its first blow into the US asylum system. You know, they did this by establishing the credible fear interviews, by denying asylum without hearing, and penalizing applicants for frivolous claims, for example, as meaning fear of returning back home if you were a trans woman or man. And so there's really just so much that's going on in reality, you know, these past like 3 years. And so if we kind of fast forward now then to when COVID-19 first happened, we can really start to see that there was such a quick pace in the policies that were taking place that there wasn't enough time to really investigate the repercussions of those policies. And so a lot a lot of the mess that was created is still existing right now. And especially during, what this meant with COVID is that the pandemic only really augmented the pre-existing vulnerabilities and conditions in jails, prisons, and detention centers. And in April of 2020 in New Mexico, the Santa Fe Dreamers Project, the American Immigration Council, and the American Immigration Lawyers Association sent a letter to our New Mexico Governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, warning about the conditions in jails and prisons and detention centers and the effect that COVID-19 would have in these places. Yet, Michelle Lujan Grisham has only released 143 individuals. As cases continue to rise, there's little testing that's being done and much more little reporting that being said about it as well.
Yes, so we're in a crisis right now. And as of September 29th, 2020, there have been at least 138,105 people in prison nationwide that have tested positive for COVID. And in New Mexico, there's at least 567 cases, but we know that that has to be a lot higher because a lot of the privately run facilities are not reporting. So as of October 2nd, there are 5,711 total confirmed cases amongst ICE detainees. And in New Mexico, there are at least 207 confirmed cases. But I just saw an article today that there has been an outbreak at Cibola, or sorry, not at Cibola, at MDC. And so I'm sure that the cases are rising as we are talking to you. Cibola County Correctional Center is not compelled to tell us the daily count numbers, even though we tried to get those. So we're unsure of the actual numbers there. Total numbers in New Mexico between prisons and detention is at least 774. And the total numbers of deaths from coronavirus among prisoners is 1,170.
Okay, so, oops.
So we have a video to show you of one of our first actions that we did that took place in July. And we're just gonna play the video and then we'll explain how it's tied to the Free Them All campaign and that action that we were trying to organize.
So as a collective, you know, like we mentioned, we believe there's no better time than now for the role of artists in the freedom struggle. And so that video you just saw was our first gesture as joining the Free Them All campaign in mid-July as a way to further bring awareness and amplify the call to release all immigrants and prisoners in our community. And so it's really one of the first actions that we did as part of this campaign was target the sites that we considered to be the front lines when it came to both the criminal and immigration system in New Mexico. And so as a collective, you know, the Free Them All campaign is only one out of the 3 campaigns that we're working on and collaborating on with others. The second campaign that we're working on is the Divestment Campaign, in which we are urging the NMERB to divest from private prisons. And the third campaign that we are working on, which is similar to the Divestment Campaign, is a policy writing campaign to propose to the New Mexico legislature to ban private prisons in New Mexico. And so our work, it's really grounded in collaboration and in working with others. And we recognize, you know, that there are a lot of groups and advocates and community members that have been doing this work for some time now. And so we're really trying to put ourselves in conversation with them. These are some of the organizations that we are currently working with to end migrant detention and abolish the carceral state. We're working towards the long-term goal of building a solidarity economy based on self-determination, justice, sustainability, and cooperation.
So this is our second campaign for Free Them All. I mean, this is our second action for Free Them All. And so on August 1st, the fronteristxs, along with Anonymous Untitled and the White Coats for Black and Indigenous Lives, we installed a cage intervention onto the existing sculpture, which is called Tug of War, on the west side of the state capitol building in Santa Fe. So the cage was placed around half of the sculpture, creating the effect of the girls pulling the boys out of the cage to quote unquote free them. The Free Them banners were used to shield the artists that were installing the cage. And we took this photo to make a statement about migrant children being separated from their families and left in cages. So here you'll see it wasn't until 2 days later that the cage was actually taken down by the state workers, where they actually freed the children. So this is a little pun that the artists were trying to do, but a pun on a very serious situation that's happening, right?
And so some of the other ways that we are collaborating and working with other communities include holding a banner making workshop. And these are some of the photos from that workshop where we invited close comrades to help make these banners that we would then drop at various locations in New Mexico. An upcoming project that we are really excited about and have just acquired funding for is our Free Them All Billboards project, where we plan to fund 5 to 7 Black, Indigenous, or POC New Mexico-based artists to create billboards with the messaging that is tied to the Free Them All campaign. And we want these billboards to be located in Santa Fe, near Albuquerque, Estancia, Chaparral, and Cibola, in order to be closer to where it is that these sites of jails, prisons, and detention centers are. And so we're really interested in this large-scale form of distributing messaging. And I'll go ahead and let Bernadine talk a little bit about how it is that we have used this method in the past with our divestment campaign.
So we launched New Mexico ERB Divest, the hashtag with the digital billboard on East I-40 in Albuquerque. So this is a billboard that we created with the collective. And then if you go to the next slide, we continued with projections of images and text on the former county jail in downtown Albuquerque one night. It was really fun. We had a VJ projecting divest prison funds on this previous jail. And we had music and we were live streaming it for everybody to see. And so our call is especially urgent in the current COVID-19 pandemic, where we're seeing outbreaks at detention centers and prisons. So fronteristxs joins the fight to divest the state educator retirement fund from private prisons and detention centers. And if you are an educator or staff in the state of New Mexico, your retirement funds just may be have direct holdings in private prison corporation, the private prison corporation GEO group. So divestment is an effective method to bring about social change. Already we've seen government funds like the New York City Pension Fund and the University of California schools, as well as private pension funds, Columbia University, they've already divested from private prisons. So we know that this is possible, and they are definitely models that we're looking towards to see how this could be a successful campaign. So this is sorry, we just looked at the photo of the board. The last New Mexico ERB board meeting was on October 14th, and we urged New Mexico educators to write comments to the board to divest. And we're going to be asking you to do that same thing again, because the next New Mexico ERB meeting is on October 16th at 9 a.m. And we need as many people, educators and staff, to write in their concerns about their pension funds being invested in private prisons. And so the ERB currently holds shares of GEO Group in one small portion of their portfolio with almost 400 other stocks. And so to sell this stock would only make a tiny, almost undetectable change to the management of that portfolio, but still they are really, really resistant. So as of August 7th, NMERB holds 25,100 shares in the GEO Group. So if you're interested in helping us with divestment, we urge you to please sign the divestment petition. So you could find the link or find the petition here at bit.ly Prison Divest New Mexico, or you could visit prisondivestnewmexico.org to just read up and to see how this is affecting New Mexico children and New Mexico educators and staff.
And so as Bernadine mentioned, New Mexico really has the opportunity to set an example. And we have the opportunity to be among the first to start this movement to divest our public retirement funds from private prisons. And so this is how it is that you can help. The first thing you can do is by this Friday, October 9th at noon, you could email each trustee and executive director, Jan Goodwin, telling them it's time to listen to their beneficiaries, to dump GEO stocks immediately, and never invest in any type of prison stocks again. It's super important that you put divestment in the subject line, and you can find some more information about where these email addresses, the trustees' email addresses are at prisondivestnewmexico.org. Another way that you can help is by attending the New Mexico Educational Retirement Board's trustee meeting this October 16th at 9 a.m. I would encourage you to stay tuned for the meeting link. We will have it posted both on our website, and you can also find it at prisondivestnewmexico.org. In the past, the board has worked really hard to try to silence us, and they have done this by changing the links last minute, making it hard to access the meetings. They've also done this by turning off the cameras and not allowing us to show our names. So it's really important, that we show up, that we take up space, and that we show that our voice is important and that matters.
So this is a photo of our last action that happened last Friday. Patrice dropped a wall-sized banner at the sanitary tortilla factory on 2nd and Lead, and it read, "Prisons don't disappear social problems, they disappear human beings." This is a quote from Angela Davis. Under that, we have "Free them all, divest from prisons, invest in housing, healthcare, and education" with the hashtags New Mexico ERB divest and care not cages. We also this day held a press conference in front of the banner to talk about divestment and what it means for New Mexico. And all of that footage and more is uploaded to our social media. And you could find us on IG, Twitter, and Facebook, all at the @fronteristxs with the X. So if you could change the slide. So another action item that you could do to help us in regards to the Free Them All campaign is that you could call and bug Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham. I'm sure she's not busy at all. And Attorney General Hector Balderas, and tell them your name, tell them that you're a constituent and that you're calling with an urgent concern about the health and safety of people inside New Mexico immigrant detention centers, prisons, and jails. So if you need a script, we have that here as well. Hello, my name is, I'm a constituent. I'm calling with urgent concerns about the health and safety of people inside of New Mexico immigrant detention centers, prisons, and jails. I'm urging you to save lives by requiring the immediate release of people in our state's jail and prisons, and asking for you to pressure ICE to release all migrants from detention centers, because inaction is a death sentence. Can get involved. You could help by signing the divestment petition. You could send written comments to the Board of New Mexico ERB. You could call these numbers to demand the release of migrants and prisoners from detention and jails and prisons. And here's our information in case you need to reach us, our email and our social media platforms. So that's what we have today to present to you. And now we want to take your questions and kind of have a dialogue about this, about migrant justice and ending the carceral state.